What's going on today, guys? So today we're going back in time to the year 2002, where superhero films could be incredibly fun and entertaining and didn't have to be so dark and weren't like the Amazing Spider-Man films, which set up bullshit sequels. Today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man. Now I know this is the Spider-Man trilogy, but we were talking about the first one. I also have my DVD of it right over there. I am so happy to be talking about this movie. Finally! I've been wanting to talk about these movies for so long. And now I finally am able to because Spider-Man is going to be in Captain America Civil War. And just as a warning, guys, as always, this review will contain some spoilers. So if you have not seen Spider-Man, what are you doing? Please watch it because I highly recommend it. Spider-Man was a heavy influence on my childhood. He was my favorite superhero probably until Captain America came out. I loved and adored Spider-Man. I would wear Spider-Man costumes out for Halloween night when I was a kid. That was fun. And at the same time, I watched these movies religiously as a kid. So yes, guys, there is going to be a slight bit of nostalgia just like Star Wars. So I think at this point, everyone truly knows what the plot of Spider-Man is. It's really not that hard to follow. Peter Parker starts out in this film as a loner teenage nerd, played fantastically by Tobey Maguire, who gets bitten by a radioactive spider, develops web-swinging abilities, and is able to fight crime as his ultimate alter ego, Spider-Man. That's it. This movie is an origin story. Now, I know a lot of people hate origin stories, but this was back in a time where origin stories could be fun and they didn't have to set up other movies. This movie was perfectly fine on its own. So basically, it's one of those movies that they made and they let the consumer or the audience member decide, you know what, this is a great movie, we want more. And that is exactly what Spider-Man is, because I had a wonderful time watching this movie. Were there some nostalgic moments for me? Yes. Now before I go very in depth with the film, I'd like to first talk about the casting, because you want to make sure you have the right person to play the right Spider-Man, but you also want to make sure that you have the right actors and actresses to play these people. And with all honesty, guys, I think the casting of this movie is absolutely stellar. Let's briefly talk about Tobey Maguire in this movie. He absolutely sells it as Peter Parker. He is by far my favorite Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I don't know about Andrew Garfield. He doesn't look like a nerd to me. He just looks like a really popular kid who just is kind of misunderstood in a way. Tobey Maguire perfectly embodied the character, who is a short, teenage nerd, very shy, and is just not able to tell the woman he loves how he feels about her. Now look, guys, I can talk about how much I love James Franco all day, but I really feel like after Freaks and Geeks, this was his major movie that he starred in, and I gotta say, guys, I think he is perfect in this movie. The character he embodies is absolutely perfect. I can really imagine James Franco being that person in real life. He isn't a nerd, he isn't smart like Peter, he's trying to get the girls, and I completely understand that. I've seen people all the time who embody that type of character, and I've seen people all the time that embody Peter Parker's character. So obviously their parts are very fleshed out. Now let's talk about Kirsten Dunst for a while. I think she is a very terrific actress, and I really think that she did a great job in this film. But as I started to get older, the more and more I began to examine this film, the more and more I began to examine her. And examining her again in this film was a very enjoyable one, nonetheless. As I was watching the film, it became increasingly more striking to me that she is incredibly important to the story, and she's very relatable to Peter, and I'm going to explain that later. Now look, with what I said about Harry and James Franco portraying the character, I said that he was perfect. But my God, Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, I would say he's in top 5 to 10 casting choices ever. He was absolutely perfect in this role. I can't visually see anyone else playing him. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is, like Willem Dafoe, some of the best casting ever made. This guy absolutely owned every scene. Every line spoken by him. He just owned every scene, no matter what scenario was going on, because he had some quippy, fast dialogue that actually worked. Now, as the story moves on, we get introduced to Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris, who plays Uncle Ben and, of course, Aunt May. Two of my favorite characters of all time, actually, because they are incredibly essential to Peter. Later on in the film, Uncle Ben takes Peter to the library, and of course he goes to the wrestling ring, but they have what in my opinion is the most important conversation, and actually I think the best part of the movie, because it gives you the most important lesson to the film, and that is what Uncle Ben says, one of my favorite lines of all time.
With great power comes great responsibility.
That line is incredibly significant. Not only is it one of the best lines I think ever written, it's also one of my personal favorites because it is incredibly essential to not only being a superhero with Spider-Man, but it's about life itself. It's so important. What I also thought was great about this particular scene is that this is the last time we see Uncle Ben until he is lying on the ground, having been shot, holding Peter's arm, and then just dying. It's such an intense moment, but what's great is that he put in the film's lesson, so you feel that dramatic weight, you feel the heft, and of course, that chase scene is still awesome. I loved watching it, it's very intense, and of course, I cannot continue without mentioning one of my favorite scores of all time by Danny Elfman. I personally think that I like the score in this movie a little bit more than 2. I think it's the best score because it perfectly captures every scene, the atmosphere, the feel, the weight to it, and all the dramatic heft. It's so well written. Now let's talk about the direction by Sam Raimi, because this could have been something bad. This movie could have looked absolutely terrible, and I could absolutely have seen that. And I gotta say, this movie's directed incredibly well. The directing style by Sam Raimi is so cool because he is such a different director. It's very hard to just describe exactly what's different, but what I loved is that every single action scene, there's no shaky cam crap that we are just seeing all the time. Everything is perfectly in camera. There's nothing that you really miss with any scene. Sam Raimi is a voracious comic book reader, and he owns a ton of them, so I really think he understood the feel of how to make a true comic book film, and I really think he succeeded in it wholeheartedly. Now, I do obviously have some flaws with this movie because I tried to remove myself from all that childhood nostalgia, and while there are maybe 1, 2, or 3 moments where I was like, yeah, that moment I just love so much, I do think there are some problems with this movie, and I feel like the direction is smooth, it's very slick, but there are some incredibly obvious ADR moments, and there are even moments where the Green Goblin's supposed to say something, but you don't even see his lips move. That was kind of an awkward feeling for me. I honestly feel like the CGI is starting to look a little bit dated. There are some shots that look like, yeah, they're looking at a green screen. And I found that unfortunate because I feel like, besides CGI, I feel like this movie holds up pretty damn well compared to a lot of other superhero films. However, there are a lot of scenes that just feel like, wow, it's CGI. Right? It looks artificial to me. Another big flaw I have with this movie is actually a scene where Peter is talking to J. Jonah Jameson after taking pictures of the Green Goblin. And then all of a sudden, the Green Goblin crashes through the window. Okay, that's great. He holds Jameson by the throat, and he asks him this: who's the photographer that takes the pictures of Spider-Man? Now, to me, that wouldn't make any sense, because if you've ever read a newspaper in your entire life, you would know that every single photographer that takes pictures for the paper is going to be credited at some point on the page. So you might want to read the page, right, Goblin? And in multiple scenes in the film, we see Willem Dafoe reading newspapers. So why wouldn't he just look at the paper and see, oh, it was taken by Peter Parker? Okay. Now, if there's one word I really dislike, it's cheesy. So I'm going to refrain from using that word, and I'm going to use the word silly. Because while Spider-Man has some great action sequences, followed by an ending sequence that we'll talk about soon, I unfortunately think that this movie does have some really silly moments. There are moments in this movie where I'm like, it doesn't entirely work, and why is that happening? Like, there's a scene where the general is watching this guy with the new Quest Aerospace glider. He lifts up into the air, and the Green Goblin just blows him up. And then he fires it at the brigade, and then the general just screams for no reason, and then it just blows up. Huh? That's kind of a silly moment right there. Now, the one thing I really enjoyed about Spider-Man that I think really goes into Spider-Man 2 incredibly well is how well they handled Peter Parker and his alter ego Spider-Man, because it really is a split personality. And I think that they handled it extremely well. I think they handled it even better in the sequel. Now, I mentioned Mary Jane Watson being very similar to Peter, and I actually think that Mary Jane herself also has a split personality, because she is the victim of an abusive father, and she lives next to Peter, and she's very quiet, and she tries to show her feelings and emotions towards Peter. And the other side to her is the fun, lovable girl that just tries to go out everywhere, wears these revealing low-cut tops and stuff like that, kind of like the fashionable teenage girl that she tries to be. And I feel like that also creates two personalities, and I really think that they handled that incredibly well. And also at the same time, Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin also, they have a split personality, just like the other two characters. This movie really focuses on split personalities, And it does it in such a subtle way, specifically for Mary Jane. But with the Green Goblin, I love that scene. And also, at the very end of that particular scene, where Willem Dafoe starts laughing, why do you need a goblin mask to cover that type of a face? And I can't go without mentioning the final fight in that broken building. My God! This is something I'm going to have to admit to you guys. I actually had a little bit of trouble watching this scene because Spider-Man gets demolished by the Green Goblin. This fight is so incredibly intense. Now, many people said that this scene contains partial shaky cam. To me personally, I feel like it's more handheld cam because Sam Raimi is a master at doing handheld cam. And I really feel like this scene was all the better for it because using that created so much intensity. And then once the handheld cam stops, that's when Spider-Man is at his lowest point. And my goodness, rewatching this movie, I realized just how far Sam Raimi really went with his evil deadness. When the Green Goblin uses the trident to try to impale Spider-Man, wow, that is so Evil Dead. Now remember how I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there were a couple of nostalgic moments that I just couldn't get out of myself? Well, this is actually one of them. And of course, that is when Spider-Man overpowers the Green Goblin. That moment I was like, yes! Thank God! This has to be one of the greatest death scenes of all time. I just need to show it to you because it is so great. I love it. Oh. I think Willem Dafoe is tied with Sean Bean for being the actor who's died in most movies. So seeing him die in this movie was like, okay, it's Willem Dafoe dying, alright. So Spider-Man takes the Green Goblin back to his place, sets him down on the bed, and then of course Harry is there, and he says, what have you done? Pulls out the gun, tries to shoot Spider-Man, he escaped, and now he is on his desperate revenge path on finding out just who Spider-Man is and killing him. And that is so great because it sets up conflicts between Harry's best friend Peter. It's so great because they're now going to clash, and I love that. And I love Harry's last line to Peter, which is, Spider-Man will pay. I swear my father's grave, Spider-Man will pay. So, of course, we get the lovey-dovey Mary Jane Peter Parker stuff at the end. But then, of course, Peter Parker says,
this is my gift. My curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
I love that ending, one of my favorite endings of all time. And just a fun movie. Well, guys, that was my review for the very first Spider-Man film. It has some of my favorite moments of all time, one of my favorite endings of all time. I love this movie, guys. Spider-Man is part of my life, and he is incredibly essential to me growing up and loving Spider-Man. Guys, I'm going to give Spider-Man an A. Guys, thank you so much for watching as always. I would love to hear all those comments, so send them in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching my videos. If you like this, please click that subscribe button. It is so important to me. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and stay tuned.